Okay, hello everybody, my name is Francesco. I have recently completed a master's degree in film studies and I decided that it would be a good idea for me to turn some of my research into educational video essays that are free and easy to access. The reason why I decided to start by talking about slow cinema is that it's quite a complicated category to define and I couldn't find very many comprehensive takes about it online, so hopefully this video will help supplement that. All of my sources will be in the description, which also contains a lot of stuff that I consulted in the past, but do not directly cite in the video. So if you're interested in this topic, by all means check it out. Also thank you to all of my friends who helped me put this together and who have done some line readings for me. Among them is Tom from Curmudgeon Media, who has his own YouTube channel for film and media analysis, which I will also link in the description. Now, without further ado, enjoy the video. Asking when might seem like a strange place to start, but we must remember that when we say slow cinema, we are not referring to any and all the films that one might perceive as slow. Slowness is after all subjective, and the films that you or I might find to be dragging or boring may not be the same to someone else. Slow cinema films are deliberate, so there is a level of objectivity to their slowness. But not all deliberately slow films are slow cinema. You see, when you read the term slow cinema in an article or book, it's in reference to a critical debate about contemporary films that originated in the early 2000s. The term a cinema of slowness, which can be used interchangeably with slow cinema, comes from a 2003 talk by French critic Michel Simon titled The State of Cinema. Simon interpreted slow cinema as a direct response to the ever-increasing quick rhythms imposed on the industry by Hollywood. I quote, "Facing Hollywood's lack of patience and themselves made impatient by the bombardment of sound and image to which they are submitted as TV or cinema spectators, a number of directors have reacted by a cinema of slowness, of contemplation, as if they wanted to live again the sensuous experience of a moment revealed in its authenticity. Several directors have been proponents in recent years of a resistance to the fetishism of technology. Among the directors mentioned by Simon are Theo Angelopoulos in Greece, Nuri Bilge Ceylan in Turkey, Bela Tar in Hungary, Abbas Kiarostami in Iran, Tsai Ming-liang and Hou Xiaoxian in Taiwan, Bruno Dumont in France. And to this day, when we use the term slow cinema, its contemporary variance is still what we are talking about. For sure, the slow directors mentioned by Simon and those who came after them are influenced by cinemas of the 20th century. Italian neorealism of the 1940s and 1950s is one of the primary, and even closer, I would say, are the 1970s films of people like Chantal Akerman or Andrei Tarkovsky. But all of those have their own labels that are not necessarily tied to deliberate slowness, because critics have never interpreted them as a response to speediness or to the fetishism of technology. However, in the late 1980s and early 1990s, during the fall of the Soviet Union and the rising hegemony of global capitalism, there were movements like slow food and slow travel that proposed to counter such a hegemony. So, a few years later, critics looked back and decided to throw slow cinema into the mix. And we must remember that slow cinema is not a movement or a school. It's simply a style or approach without a manifesto. And if we are to answer the question as to who is slow cinema, let me throw in a few more director names that weren't mentioned by Simon. Carlos Reigadas in Mexico, Lisandro Alonso in Argentina, Pedro Costa in Portugal, Kelly Reichardt, and some films by Gus Van Sant in the United States, Jia Zhangke in China, Apichapong Virasetakul in Thailand, Lav Diaz in the Philippines, Roy Andersson in Sweden, some of the work by Claire Denis in France. The reason why I'm mentioning everyone's country is that there is another important contextualization question to answer before we get into the meat of things. While I don't believe that all of the directors mentioned in this video are specifically responding or reacting to Hollywood, the fact that Simon interprets them as such highlights a category that slow cinema overlaps with: world cinema. Now, you may ask, isn't all cinema world cinema? Well, yes, in a way. But the term is often used in a specific way which, for our intents and purposes, we will interpret as non-Hollywood. While this may be an oversimplification, it's useful to understand Simon's argument. Hollywood's films are defined by some key characteristics: narrative structures that build towards an end point, the prevalence of continuity editing, and an adherence to the studio system. World cinema defines those films which are independently funded, sometimes directly by film festivals which also represent their main venue for distribution. As such, they cater to a different type of audience than that of commercial theatre chains, and generally speaking, travel through a different market. Now, I should specify, non-Hollywood does not mean non-American. Several US filmmakers make and distribute films outside of the studio system. And the question of world cinema is even more complicated than that. What about Indiewood? American films that are made independently but distributed in the same market and to the same audiences as Hollywood? And how about all of those films made outside of Hollywood, which nevertheless use Hollywood paradigms and are produced by massive studios? This is certainly too broad a topic for this particular video. But when it comes to slow cinema, the question is easy to answer. Slow films are independent, festival-friendly, and they come from a staggering variety of countries, so I would say that they fit pretty well into the world cinema label. So, to answer the question, where is slow cinema? Well, it's everywhere. Now that we contextualized the kind of films that we are talking about, the next question to ask is, what makes a film slow? And there are some stylistic answers. Long takes. A static or slow-moving camera. In some cases, excessive runtimes. Lack of narrative or an episodic narrative structure. The pacing of the diegetic action. But what is interesting here is that it takes more than one or two of these elements to achieve slow cinema. Many long-take films like Birdman impose a steady, fast rhythm on their action. And even something like La Jetée, which is composed solely of still images, has an engaging narrative with several events intertwined into it, and a concluding climax. Therefore, neither of those examples can be considered deliberately slow. This is picked up by Song-Hui Lim, who a few years ago wrote a complete account of what we mean by cinema of slowness and stillness by looking at the films of Tsai Ming-liang.
It takes more than static long takes to achieve a cinema of stillness. Rather, the lack of diegetic action within the long takes constitutes the other half of the picture.
One of the sequences that Lim uses as an example of various of these components working together is the opening shot of Tsai's What Time Is It There? This is a static 2-minute long take, showing a character sit on his dining table with a plate of food, light up a cigarette, then impatiently stand up to call his son to the kitchen, go back to the table and finally walk all the way to the background of the shot and out on a balcony. Lim points out that the rhythm of this shot is dictated by the diegetic action, the movement of the character across the frame, which is accentuated by the subtle shifts in focus that occur every time he moves back and forth. So how is this slow? The important thing to notice is that this isn't slow motion, nor is the movement of the character particularly unnaturally slowed down. This scene is slow because it feels slow. We don't know who this character is, so there is no dramatic tension for us to latch onto. His movement does not appear to follow a narrative, and therefore we can't anticipate what he is going to do next. So our focus is completely dedicated to this undramatic action, since there is no other movement from the camera or otherwise happening in front of us. And on top of that, we are essentially watching a character wait. Therefore, like him, we become aware of the passing of time. This is the primary effect that slow cinema tries to produce, and I believe that it directly affects the spectator at the level of the body. Because when you become aware of the passing of time, there are various bodily reactions which activate. You could start feeling bored or anxious, or you could become relaxed. Earlier I said that slowness is subjective, but so is the effect that it produces on different people. Because there must be a reason why people subject themselves to hours and hours of uneventful drudgery, right? Now that we contextualized slow cinema and explained its stylistic tenets, the next question to ask is, why should I watch this? Obviously, there is no specific answer, As I said, slowness is subjective, and so is the effect it produces on you. What I can say about myself is that I used to be uninterested in slow cinema until I found the right directors for me, and then I sort of got used to it, and now I love it. But it's precisely this subjectivity that makes slow cinema such a hot topic for debate. In 2010, Sight and Sound's Nick James wrote an inflammatory editorial titled Passive Aggressive, where he argues,
"There are times, as you watch someone trudge up yet another woodland path, when you feel an implicit threat. Admit you're bored, and you're a Philistine. Such films are passive-aggressive in that they demand great swathes of our precious time to achieve quite fleeting and slender aesthetic and political effects. Sometimes it's worth it, sometimes not. Slow cinema has been the clear alternative to Hollywood for some time, but from now on, with Hollywood in trouble, I'll be looking out for more active forms of rebellion."
James's accusations speak to a much wider, much older debate. It's the contrast between high art and low art, which is ripe with elitism and pretentiousness. This is reflected in some of the reactions to James's article, like the one of Harry Toto, who wrote a blog post in direct response.
"I can't believe a serious magazine would publish such anti-intellectual banter. If you don't like these films, deal with it frontally. No need to pretend that art would never put you to sleep. I believe the guilt is onto the sleeper. Filmmakers, good or bad, don't have to make your job easier. That's your problem. If you have trouble watching films as an imposed assignment, find another job less strenuous on your patience."
Looking at these two citations in a vacuum with no extra context, I'm inclined to agree with Nick James, if you believe that. This is not because I think that all slow cinema lovers are bourgeois snobs, but because I'm aware that it's a subjective style, and if you don't find any enjoyment in it, you should be allowed to say that. Furthermore, the idea that slow cinema is a purely mental, intellectual exercise sort of echoes the old-fashioned Cartesian belief that the mind and body are separate. It acknowledges the contemplative potential of watching slow films, but completely ignores their universal ability to affect the spectator's body, as if brain and body were mutually exclusive categories. For instance, look at this sequence in the middle of Apicciapon Viraceteco's Cemetery of Splendor, where the film tries to physically lull the spectator into a state of relaxation by using soft lights, a low hum in the soundtrack, and a slow rhythm. On a similar note, director Abbas Kiarostami went even further. In a making-of documentary on his experimental film 5 dedicated to Ozu, he explains,
"You know how annoyed some directors get on finding out that someone has fallen asleep watching their film? I would not be annoyed at all. I can confidently say that you would not miss anything if you had a short nap. The important thing to me is how you feel once the film is finished, the relaxing feeling that you carry with you after the film ends."
I find this inherently unpretentious. Reaching the point where you can just close your eyes, relax and fall asleep does not require any prior knowledge of film history, any artistic taste, or even any patience. Also, while this perspective probably proves Nick James's point about slow cinema being passive, it also disproves the point about it being aggressive. Of course, there are slow directors who disagree with this idea of passivity, but still offer alternative ways of approaching their films.
它是不是政治的一种政治的企图？我觉得说很可能我有一种企图，是超越政治的。我总觉得说它是可以，观众是可以被教育的或者被训练的去看一个去更加的有敏感度来看一个东西这个是经过训练和教育的当然都是因为有这样的作品的关系这是我的想法。
But there are obviously many, many more types of experiences to be drawn from slow cinema. Several slow films aren't trying to relax the spectator, but they're using drudgery and repetition to reflect the humdrum existence of their characters, and it would not be out of place to feel frustrated when experiencing them. But none of these results make slow films undemocratic, precisely because what you make of them is up to you, the viewer. What I will say in their favour is that there is a reason why slow cinema has been lumped together with slow food and slow travel, despite not being a movement of its own. A way to save ourselves from the alienating forces of contemporary global capitalism would be to exit its rhythms, in other words, slow down. Just look at how many commuters and office workers found out during COVID lockdown just how much time, money and energy they were wasting running from place to place when they could just have been working from home. However, it's currently impossible for most of us to escape these rhythms without the added element of social isolation or unemployment, which are just as, if not more, harmful. Some slow films can serve as a temporary respite, an experience of time that is not dictated by deadlines and rushes and points of arrival. Others can shine a light on our own individual condition and allow us to look at how we experience time in a different way. But whether it's escape or self-reflection or even sleep that you're looking for, slow films can, as microcosms of time, allow you to achieve it while you're sitting comfortably in the cinema, away from the trappings of the outside world.